Namaste, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you are logging from. It's an international conference. And at the outset, I would like to thank Indian Institute of Spices Research for inviting me to speak at this international symposium. And I am really honored to be in the company of such illustrious panelists. The subject of my presentation is Codex Alimentarius and its role in standards for spices. Actually, normally I take about 3 days, a minimum of 3 days to provide training on Codex Alimentarius, and here I'm going to speak only for 20 minutes. What I'm going to cover briefly is how is the Codex Alimentarius related to the SPS agreement, what is its history, the structure, and it's of course the relevance in terms of international trade and food safety. As Dr. Krishnamurthy was mentioning, food safety is extremely important, and Dr. Thomas also talked about it. And the Codex work that is relevant to spices is something which I will also focus on. So the purpose of the SPS agreement, as you all know, is to give the right to different countries to protect the life and health of plants, animals, and human beings, and at the same time ensuring that you do not create unnecessary barriers to trade, which means that you have a right to protect, but cannot create a barrier which totally stops imports. And therefore, what is said is that you may still have standards which are stricter than Codex or which are stricter than IPPC or OIE, but they should be basically based on scientific justification. And therefore, the SPS agreement encourages all the standard setting bodies, the three sisters of the SPS agreement, as they call, is to harmonize standards, have harmonized standards globally, and encourage countries to align with Codex, with IPPC and OIE. IPPC, as you all know, is International Plant Protection Convention based out of Rome. And OIE is Office International des Epizooties, which is the World Organization for Animal Health based in Paris. And Codex Alimentarius is the international body of the United Nations also based in Rome. So these are the three standard setting organizations recognized by the SPS agreement. It's written in the SPS agreement that countries are encouraged to align with these international standards. So coming to Codex, it is a joint body of FAO and WHO, and was set up in 1963, and since it is once in Rome, when it was formed in 1963, there were 30 developed countries, except 2 of them, Argentina and Thailand, and India was not a founding member. Meetings of the commission are held annually, but then there are several committees, which I'm going to explain in the next few slides. So the entire world, almost the entire world, 99% of the world population is a member of Codex. These are various countries, and India became a member in 1964, so it was not a founding member. And there are 188 countries plus the European Union that are members of Codex. It is interesting to know that WTO has 164 members. There are 164 countries that are members of WTO, but in Codex there are 188 countries that are members, plus of course the European Union. This is a regional distribution of all the members that I have shown on the screen. So what is the mandate? What does it do? Codex Alimentarius adopts standards for food products, then codes of practice and guidelines. So for example, take the example of, let us say, arsenic in rice. So there is a Codex standard for arsenic, which means that this is the maximum limit arsenic that can be found as a residue in the rice. But then how do you achieve it? So they also develop a code of practice. So there are several such documents which are useful for all sectors in the food business and also for spices. So they adopt standards, they adopt codes of practice which are globally applicable, and they also make guidelines where code of practice is not possible. For example, what should be the nutrient reference value? How do you fix it? How do you fix nutrition requirements? How do you enter into bilateral, multilateral or bilateral recognition agreements or equivalence agreements? How do you set up a national food control system? So those kinds of guidelines have also been developed by Codex Alimentarius. So there are mainly three things: standards for food products, codes of practice, and guidelines. And these are all voluntary standards. Codex does not set mandatory standards. It is countries who adopt or adapt to these international standards, and then they make their own legislations. Then they make their own national regulations, as they call it. So in FSSAI, when I was there, by the way, when you gave an introduction about me, you mentioned that I'm the advisor in FSSAI. I was the advisor. I'm retired now. I retired almost 6 years ago. So I'm no longer there. But FSSAI started the harmonization process in 2012, and we aligned most of the standards with Codex. But alignment with Codex or harmonization with Codex does not necessarily mean copy paste. It is the process of alignment. It is the process of carrying out risk assessment and then taking a risk management decision. So it took almost 4 or 5 years to complete the process, and we continue to update our standards. Most of them are updated based on Codex, but it depends on what is our country's need. And that is what the SPS agreement encourages us to do. So the mandate basically is the protection of the health of consumers, plus they ensure fair practices in food trade. And all these standards are science-based, and the manner in which it is done is by promoting coordination between members, that is 189 members, plus observer organizations, which are 236, international intergovernmental organizations and international non-governmental organizations, like various NGOs, international NGOs are there that are members of Codex, plus 16 UN organizations, and they work transparently and follow a consensus-based approach. Everything is recorded. Even the meetings are audio recorded, meetings of some of the committees. So what are the main committees? So as I said, there's the Codex Alimentarius Commission at the top, then there is an executive committee, and then there are subsidiary bodies which are called Codex committees, the commodity committees, that is the vertical committees for products, and then the horizontal committees on food safety issues. So fish and fishery products were just reactivated, and spices and culinary herbs committee was approved by the Codex Alimentarius Commission in 2013. And India is the proud host of this Codex committee. The secretariat is in the Spices Board of India. There are several other Codex commodity committees that have completed their work. For example, meat committee, milk and milk products committee, then processed fruits and vegetables committee. They have completed their work, and therefore I'm not showing them here. But if you go to the Codex website, you will find several of these commodity committees that were set up, even chocolates committee and mineral water committee, and how many of them. Then there are general subject committees. If you see CCFA, CC stands for Codex Committee, then the Codex Committee for additives, contaminants, food hygiene. Food hygiene, they said, my general principles lays down the procedures, methods of analysis and sampling, nutrition and pesticide residues, veterinary. All these committees, if you see, go to the website, you will see that all these Codex committees are hosted and chaired by developed countries. The commodity committees are mostly chaired by the developing countries, for example, spices. Then there are 6 regional coordinating committees. You remember the map that I showed you? There are 6 coordinating committees. There are 7 geographical regions because North America and Southwest Pacific are 2 different geographical locations. So there are 6 regional coordinating committees whose job is to look after the interest of the regions, to work for the regions, to general coordination of the regions, setting regional standards if necessary for products which are neither produced globally nor traded globally, and you need a regional standard. For example, there was a regional standard in Asia for chili sauce, but now that has been converted into a global standard because it is produced globally and traded globally. So every region has a coordinator, and the current coordinator for Asia is China. Before that, it was India. So what is the relevance of Codex? It is based on scientific principles. It is based on consensus. Therefore, it provides a lot of flexibility. It helps the two trading partners to exchange information. It is largely standardized because the Codex standards are sometimes taken as common standards, and therefore it saves a lot of time and facilitates trade. If there are differences between countries, it helps to settle the differences. So for pesticide residues committee, I can see Dr. K.K. Sharma on the screen, and he leads the Indian delegation to this committee. And it is a reference standard in dispute settlement system because Codex standards are referenced in the SPSA. So what is relevant to the developing countries? They have set standards for mycotoxins that Dr. Krishna Kumar mentioned, heavy metals, contaminants, toxins, pesticide residues, veterinary drug residues, food additives, and several commodity standards in the case of spices and other products. So what is the work on spices that has been done by Codex? So you can go to this link that I have mentioned, and I have already emailed my presentation to Dr. Krishnamurthy, which he will kindly circulate to all of you. And you can go to this link, and there are 4 standards for spices that have been adopted by Codex: black, white, and green pepper, cumin, thyme, and dehydrated garlic. The work on 7 standards is at different stages. In case of 5 standards, oregano, ginger, basil, cloves, and saffron, it is at step 5, which is at the middle of the adoption process. But work on paprika and nutmeg has just started, and work on cardamom and turmeric is yet to start because there's so much of workload. And this committee meets once in 18 months, and now there is a proposal that this committee should meet every year because the workload is increasing. And until now, not a single standard for culinary herbs has been adopted by this Codex committee. So there is a lot of work for this committee, and there is an opportunity for Indian Institute of Spices Research and other ICR institutions and different other organizations to provide inputs to the Spices Board of India so that new work for setting standards can be taken up by this Codex committee. There is a lot of work to be done. So in terms of food additives, the colorings and flavoring agents and all those things, tenderizers. So Codex, the food additives fall under the chapter 12, food category 12 of the general standards for food additives. And this is available on the Codex website. It was the latest document is of 2019. It is still to be modified. I think 2020 is likely to come anytime now. So there are different flavoring agents and different other things which have been listed in the GSFA, the General Standards for Food Additives, where either there are maximum use limits that have been prescribed, or they can be used based on good manufacturing practices. For food hygiene, hygiene is very important because there have been lots of complaints about salmonella in spices, and there can be other contaminants also. So this document, which was revised in 2020, is extremely important. And there is a separate code of hygienic practice for low moisture foods, and spices are low moisture foods, as we all know. And there is a separate document which needs to be referred to. It was adopted in 2018, and the link is given there. So the food businesses and the government organizations can promote these links, these standards, these guidelines. These are all codes of practices and can be adopted or adapted according to the Indian needs and provided and disseminated to the farmers in India. There are Codex Standards for pesticide MRLs. For spices, there are about 90 pesticides, and I'm too small a person in front of Dr. K.K. Sharma to talk about pesticide residues. He will be able to guide us more on this. But if there are certain pesticides which are used in case of spices and there are no Codex MRLs, perhaps new work can be initiated at the instance of Dr. Sharma and taken forward. And new Codex Standards can be set, and that is how FSSAI can also make changes in the regulatory standards. Contaminants and toxins. General standards for contaminants and toxins in food and feed. There is a code of practice for prevention and reduction of lead contamination in food. We do find lead contamination in spices as well. And what Dr. Krishna Kumar asked, there is a code of practice for mycotoxins, aflatoxins. There are no Codex maximum limits for aflatoxins. India has 15 ppb and 30 ppb for total, 15 for B1, but EU standards are very strict, 5 and 10. Now, if we can generate data, if we can provide justification, I think this is a good opportunity to take this to the Codex and ask them to set standards for aflatoxins so that then a pressure can be built on the European Union to relax their limits that they have prescribed so very strictly. But because there are no Codex maximum limits for aflatoxins, EU continues with such strict standards. And if EU can be encouraged to relax their standards, India's exports can increase. And the latest that I have been observing is a discussion going on for ochratoxin A in spices, like in coffee. So ochratoxin A in spices also is something that is now being observed, and I think standards for ochratoxin A should also be set up. So these two aflatoxin mycotoxins, there's a code of practice for mycotoxins, but there will be a need for a code of practice for ochratoxin also, but urgent need for setting Codex maximum limits for aflatoxins and ochratoxin in spices. Then there is a code of practice for reduction of acrylamide. Acrylamide comes because of the roasting process. And if there is ochratoxin can be controlled by roasting. So you got to find a balance between the roasting so that you remove the ochratoxin but do not create acrylamide. Then there is a code of practice for reduction of contamination of polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons. And spices, because they have a large surface area, and if you dry them in the sun, then because of the industries in the region, a lot of PAH will contaminate the spices. Therefore, it is recommended to do a factory drying of spices. But for small producers, they dry it in the sun. And so a lot of training is required for the small producers. Who is responsible for Codex work in India? We all know it is FSSAI. And in FSSAI, there is a Codex division in the office. There is a shadow committee for spices and culinary herbs in FSSAI, and the secretariat for the spices committee is in the Spices Board of India. But they do only the secretariat part of it in organizing the paperwork, in organizing the meetings finalizing the agenda in consultation with the Codex Secretariat in Rome. But there is an Indian delegation which is led either by Spices Board, which is a separate one, so there cannot be a conflict of interest, and the FSSAI, which leads the Indian delegation generally. So this is how the entire work is structured. But what is extremely important for our spices industry is a training, is capacity building to do good agricultural practices. Without implementation of good agricultural practices, and this is what Spices Board is doing with the STDF funded project to improve the best practices in the farming. So you will be having a presentation on this from Dr. Manish Pandey after my session, but this is what Codex does in case of spices and culinary herbs. Jai Hind.